Welcome to my Bridge in the Woods scene. This scene is going to be done on a 8-inch by 10.5-inch piece of semi-gloss cardstock. Alright, we've positioned the large version of the covered bridge in the center of this piece, and then I'm creating an extension on the roadway going down to the bottom of the page, and this roadway is going to be flanked by a lot of trees. I've used the sedge filler mostly to create the different textural patterning along with the grass texture there in the foreground, and in this roadway so that there's not just an open space in there. What we're doing is we're building up some texture with the Tiny Rock small stamp here. And then I'll use the larger version as well to create some additional forms down there and to create a little bit of perspective with some larger textural patterning. Going in with the Art Foamies version, using 2 of the trees of the Tree Trunk Trio stamp. And I'm using just 2 of them because I want to use an even larger stamp to the left of that, using the 2 the center and left side tree on the right side of the scene. Going in with the 9-inch version of the tree trunk here, and then we'll do one more tree with the smaller Art Foamies version. That'll represent a tree a little bit more distant from the tree trunk trio there on the left-hand side, or on the right-hand side. Okay, filling in with some additional trees in the back of the bridge, just using the top of the pine tree here, just because there's some evergreen trees in the foreground, so we need some evergreens in the background as well. Okay, now I thought we would go for a little bit of a stronger visual lead-in with these fences here. And I'll use them on the left and right side, but this right side one, I just have a little bit of space there, so I'm just using about 1.5 inches of the larger fence. Okay, I'm going in and filling in some additional forms. If there's trees around in some area, chances are there'd be some dead trees, so it gives it a little bit more of a young and old type of I don't know, kind of visual scenario. Okay, now this is where I'm going in with a very light, warm dye-based ink to create a base layer of colors. You can use any type of light, warm tone. The Distress inks have several different versions of it, but any kind of a warm beige is what you're going after. It will muddy up a lot of the colors that you have down. So what you can do is you can heat set before you go in there. But inevitably, if you're using a lot of ink on whatever ink applicator you're using as your first color, you're going to get some tones that just start to smear. You don't want them to smear a lot, but if they're smearing a little bit and making things a little bit muddy, just change up with your applicator once in a while, but don't worry about kind of muddier tones. Okay, I get them all over the place. I just figure I'm using some of that black to create a little bit of a grayscale tone, and because I'm going to be using a lot of colors after this one, so I'm not really worried about kind of a muddying of the colors. Okay, going on with a green tone here, using it in my trees. You can do, on the covered bridge stamp, you can do those trees in the background any, season you want. It's winter time right now, and I'll work at, however many seasons ahead, but I figured let's do something a little bit more spring-like with green tones and kind of, to signify, I don't know, kind of a rebirth of, the different flora. Okay, now I'm really layering a lot of different tones down, greens, browns, and we want the imagery to be somewhat integrated too. I mean, you could do just browns on your trees and green in your grass, and you could keep all of your colors separate if you want to. It has its own kind of aesthetic to it. I tend to blend things together, so I'll use a lot of brown in my green area, and I'll use a lot of the green in my brown area. I won't necessarily bring some green into my, background covered bridge or something like that, but you can see just how much brown there is in that green grass down below. But it's because I don't want necessarily just brown grass down there, but I'm using that brown as, kind of a head start to my shadow creations. And there's going to be, a pretty heavy shadow cast by my tree trunk just to give it some visual weight. Okay, now going in with my kind of focal point subject matter, the old man and the dog right there on the pathway. And I'm stamping that at this point in time because I plan on using some colored pencils, and I didn't want to have to stamp or try to stamp some water-based, dye-based ink right in that area over, waxy colored pencils. Okay, going in with my alcohol inks here and adding some additional tones using those, I can get a little bit more exact in terms of my placement of color with alcohol pens using that brushed marker. Going in with a much redder tone here, and then I'm blending it in afterwards, so you can really use your blending marker, or just go back to lighter tones and use those to blend in, your brighter and darker colors if you want to utilize some of those, but just using them directly without any blending is a little bit harsh. Okay, going in with colored pencils now. The colored pencils are an even more, kind of detail-oriented type of tool, but you can also use it, to color in large areas as well. And you can have a lot of control over it too, just, depending on how much of the pigment you apply to the paper, so you can use colored pencils very lightly, and I do that, but then I'll go in and I'll get a little bit bolder when I get comfortable with the color schemes that I'm creating. And I'm working with the colored pencils from light tones into my darker tones. And going up into the sky, going for kind of a muted blue tone. I don't want it too bright. And I also like using some of that blue down on my pathway. Okay, now going in with the paint pens here. This one's a 3mm, very large, broad tip paint pen. Adding in the shimmer into my scene. With the leaves and everything like that, reflecting light, and the grassy, varied terrain. I can add highlights into my textures using these types of paint pens. So I'll start off fairly bold. After all, this is a very large scene, so I started with 3mm. Now I'm going in with the 0.7mm extra fine acrylic paint pens. This is, I feel, this is where the images really start to kind of sparkle and give it that, kind of a friendly, welcoming look, because there's kind of like shimmery light, I guess you can say. This is where the scenes start to shimmer with this type of highlighting applied. Paint pens are really great these days. We used to do this with gel pens, which worked good too, but the paint pens just work so much easier. Adding in some little, clusters of flowers, so they could represent highlights as well if they're added into areas that would represent highlights, but when you use that white down in the grass and put it into little clusters, it could be highlighting on, some little clusters of grass or something like that, but they can also represent some sort of flowering plant, pearly everlasting or something like that. For me, it's kind of a little bit of both. It's kind of flowers, but it's also highlights. Adding in some highlights on top of my fences, giving those a little bit more of a three-dimensional look, but adding it kind of where the fence is in the light, not so much in the shadows, okay? Because you wouldn't have, like bright white highlights in kind of darker areas. Okay, changing, or really kind of expanding on the textural range of the scene, adding in some white pigment ink, and you can see how it really pushes those trees that I applied it over into the distance. But you can also put this in the foreground too, where it just represents something like fog. And again, it just varies your textural range of your objects. The fence now seems a little bit soft, you know, with soft light on it. The wood isn't supposed to be soft. And just varying the base of this tree right here, giving it some variation. You know, it's very harsh and solid looking, but you put a little bit of that mist around it, and it really softens the overall feel of the piece. And I think it makes it a little bit more welcoming. And again, just for the textural range, it really expands on things like that. Okay, adding a bit of foreground with a little bit of a overhang with the canopy of leaves up top, and it just kind of frames things off a little bit better. Okay, and that is it. Hope you enjoyed my bridge in the woods scene. If you like this video, hope you hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks so much for tuning in.